right. I am here with James Rose, and he is the founder and CEO at Inflective Group. How's it going, James?
Hi, Steve. I'm great. How are you?
Doing good, doing good. I'm excited to unpack a lot of the kind of tactical advice that we're going to dig into in the episode. But before we get there, let's talk about your background. How did you get into business?
I always wanted to be self-employed, should we say. So I reluctantly went to university, and in my final year, was able to get a grant to go and start my own business. And that led me out to Eastern Europe, of all places. At the time in 2005, there was quite an influx of investment in Eastern Europe, and I ended up buying a property and noticed a huge gap for an English-speaking furniture company. So my first business was servicing expats buying in Bulgaria, and we went on for we furnished hundreds of properties up and down the country. And that led into property development, real estate brokerage, and essentially had a kind of 8 year run where I thought I'd never work for anybody because life's easy, should we say. But that soon changed with the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, which we pushed through for a few years. But eventually kind of sold that business as kind of an asset sale. So we didn't really have a big exit, but we didn't lose money. We kind of slowly wound the business down, kept on to our real estate assets, and that really led me into the startup world, where I spent over a decade and a half really helping early stage companies to scale. Typically private equity backed companies, either in kind of technology or media. So really a combination of being on that entrepreneurial journey myself, or being very close to the founder, helping them to build their business, and that kind of led me into what we're doing now at Inflective.
Nice, very nice. So I'd like to start with mistakes. I think that my favorite topic is mistakes that you've seen people make when it comes to kind of growing their their business and getting ready for an exit. I think is kind of the what you could say like the outcome of preparing and getting everything organized and everything. But what are mistakes that you see along the way that founders make?
So from my perspective, I think a lot of founders raise money too early. They take on investment, to scale the business, and that can lead them on a path which makes them somewhat less acquirable, depending what space they're in. I think they ultimately give up some level of control, depending like the size of the round and who they bring in. But I've been involved in a number of businesses where I've seen that money isn't everything, right? You can have the big raise and feel like you've got the resources to build a big team, which you may have, but the execution risk is still quite high. You've got to hire great people, you've got to enable them. Scaling a business is chaotic at times. If you're going to go from 10 people to 100, the culture is going to change, the operations are going to change. And so I think I've seen those early stage companies maybe raise too early, raise for the wrong reasons, and not really be clear what their end goal is. Because if their end goal financially is sub 10 million, should we say, they probably don't need to raise. And actually, I think a lot of founders are kind of wooed by the PE and VC model, where they think we have to go down that road. And we kind of flip that on its head and say, well, you probably don't need to raise. You can consolidate or get a big exit without actually having all of that execution risk. So I think raising is one, and number two is probably hiring. Whether you've raised or not, it's very difficult to attract and retain the best people, and it can have such a huge impact. One person can deliver what five. One A player could deliver what five B or C players could deliver, and I've seen that play out multiple times. Founders not willing to pay to get the best people on the bus. And then ultimately they pay for that over the next 18 months with rehires, not the right enablement. So there's a lot that can go wrong when trying to scale to exit. There's a reason why less than 1% achieve an exit, typically in the SME space in the UK. And it's not for everyone, to be frank. And I speak to a lot of founders who've built their business, and to be honest, they'd be lost without it. What are they going to do when they sell it? It's a lot of passion goes into these businesses. So there's so many personal factors that influences the direction a business should go. But people and fundraising are two paths that can cause quite different trajectories.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it's a good segue into timing. Like we talked about the downfall of raising too much too early. I've definitely heard that many times because it can just kind of even slow things down in terms of a sense of urgency as well. Like people normally, in my experience, entrepreneurs, when their backs up against the wall, they do like the most productive and most intense work. And when there's not really that stress load on you, sometimes it can slow things down, I guess. So I think timing when it comes to exiting is always a question that comes up. So when, in your experience, is the right time to sell? And I guess it's kind of a two-part question of hitting a ceiling. So in every space, in every industry, sometimes people feel like they hit like a capacity, or a market's, only going to get them so far. What's your take on timing?
So look, I think the best businesses get bought; they don't get sold. If you're growing, you've got solid profit growth, you've got the right team in place, you're going to start attracting acquirers. And I see a lot of agency. We're in the agency world. I see a lot of agencies investing time and energy preparing for exit, where really, if they just focused internally on building a great business, their buyer's going to show up at some point. So I don't think I think people can get distracted by exit preparation, because ultimately there's only so much you can do inside the business that's going to increase the value. In the agency world, value is a multiple of EBITDA, unless you've got some kind of technology play. So the decision then becomes how are we going to scale. We play in the kind of 2 to 5 million revenue range here in the UK. So they're at say 4 million in revenue and 500,000 of EBIT. Their valuation multiple is not going to change that significantly until they get beyond maybe 2 million of EBIT or 5 million of EBIT. So that's a big gap they've got to fill, and that's not going to happen just by hiring a few good salespeople, increasing their prices, putting some operational go to exit readiness in place. Scale is the ultimate multiplier, and that makes you look at things quite differently. And so for us in that 2 to 5 million range, they have a couple of choices. They either raise money to hire more people, they acquire a competitor or merge with a competitor, or they join a larger group. And all of those have different pros and cons. Joining a larger group typically requires operational integration and cultural integration, which is difficult and messy. Selling it to an adjacent acquirer typically comes at a valuation that they're not happy with, and terms they're not happy with. And then raising money means losing control and having a 3 to 5 year plan of getting to that extra stage. So when you start to look at things that way, it then becomes the founder's decision, like what's important to me, and do I really want to go from X multiple to Y, and how's that going to impact their lives? Because that is a personal decision. There's different life-changing amounts for different people, different stages of life. But I think people waste a lot of time trying to do small changes that actually is not going to have any difference to the value of their business. And so I think that's a bit of a misconception that I see in the exit readiness space.
Mm. And you mentioned something there briefly about sort of growing through acquisition. Let's double
Mhm.
click on that and kind of talk about what you've seen work when people are kind of growing through acquisition, because I think that's a question that a lot of people have is how can that play out in a good sense? How can it play out in a nightmare
Mhm.
sense? So
Yeah, yeah.
what can you share there?
Um, I mean, firstly, any acquisition is a massive financial commitment, right? If they're going to acquire an adjacent business and pay them a multiple of their net profit per year or EBITDA per year, they've got to think, when am I going to get that return back? So if they're paying 5 times EBIT, okay, it's going to take me 5 years to get that investment back. And if they start with that kind of conservative mindset, they can then look at how they de-risk that deal, because there is a lot of risk with it with buying through acquisition. There's a reason why not everybody does it. It's not easy. It can be very time consuming. It can be a huge distraction from the core business. Depending on the size of the management team and the structure that business has, if the founder gets distracted with M&A activity, the business could very well start to decline because they're not leading the charge on the core business. So I think this then brings you down to kind of the structure of the deal, right? They've got to find a structure that works for both parties. And in the SME space, unfortunately, there's going to be some risk on the seller, because there's not always that guarantee that what they've built is going to be sustainable. Again, we're in the media and marketing world, which is very people centric. Those people can walk out the door tomorrow. What can they do if they're going to acquire an agency? Say they're a 20-person agency, they're going to acquire another 20-people agency. How are they going to ensure that all those people stay? How are they going to ensure they're going to be motivated to deliver what they did the previous year, and also have an accretive value on their balance sheet? And that's where the acquisition needs to bring leverage, not just scale. Because leverage is the true multiplier. If you're a PR agency and you're adding audio and creative, not only are you bringing in EBIT growth, but you're also creating cross sales and synergies that didn't exist before that acquisition. So I would say get the right advice, get the right knowledge on M&A. Look at how the big agency groups have succeeded and failed, because a lot of those groups are in decline right now. But if you look at what the big players have done, you can always take some learnings that apply to the smaller markets. It's very easy to spend a lot of money on advisors and get nowhere. So make sure that that's the path that you really want to go down, because you could end up spending quite a lot of money and spending 2 years getting distracted and realize that it wasn't really the right move, which has kind of led us to why we do things slightly differently. We take a minority position where there's some founder liquidity, but there's also an alignment on that bigger outcome. So it's a big decision for founders, and not an easy one to get right.
And how does it work with the minority like investment? Like how does that empower the investors to kind of, or how does that empower the entrepreneur? I guess I'm curious about
Yeah.
how that works.
Yeah, so by us acquiring a minority position, we essentially we de-risk it for ourselves, but we also give the founders a much bigger participation in what we will achieve as a group. So we help them push through their barriers of where they are today in terms of scaling their agency, but they also become part of our holding group, which has a much bigger balance sheet and EBITDA, which is then attractive to acquirers. So there's founders maintain their autonomy, they maintain their culture. They don't have us involved in the operational day-to-day of their business. They don't have to be absorbed by a group where the founder's on an earnout for 2 years and being demotivated. And then we kind of flip the PE model on its head, and we say, what are all the bad things that private equity have done over the years to control businesses, and how do we turn that around? And that's where we believe we've got a truly kind of founder-friendly model, where actually there's a lot more benefits built into the founders, not just on day one, but also when we exit. That is different to how a PE or VC firm would approach that.
Got it. Got it. And I guess when it comes to like redefining success, I think this is one that comes up pretty frequently before we get to negotiations. I'm always curious of what you've seen when it comes to defining success of an exit, of the outcome, because you'd mentioned previously like an asset sale that you had was, in your mind, success because you could step away, you could move on. But what have you sort of learned over the years when it comes to defining it?
So there's obviously financial metrics, and then there's also the role of the founder. So those two things are often intertwined, and the founder may want to still be part of the next stage of that business. For us, it's actually quite attractive to our founders to see us developing a group where we're creating a leadership platform for not only succession but also for maybe they want a non-exec role within the group when we sell to a much bigger group, private equity or family office. What will their role look like? How much do they want to be involved in that future legacy? Um, and what financial metrics are important to them. What we can control is the size and shape of the group and the target acquirers and the type of multiple that we expect to reach. And we control those in a number of ways. But as long as the founders can deliver upon what they're doing currently, we give them a huge compounding effect through our consolidation, which is kind of a win-win on all sides, really.
Got it. And let's talk about negotiations. Like, what's the best way to approach, getting maximum valuation, getting that kind of best foot forward when you've seen deals happen, when you've done deals? What are some tips that you can share around maximizing that value?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, with negotiation, you need a competitive bid, right? If you're the only if you're the seller and you've only got one buyer that you're speaking to, you're already at a disadvantage. So you need to create a competitive environment through the growth and value that you're bringing to the marketplace. So, as mentioned earlier, the best businesses are they're bought and they're not sold. So if you're going to market through a broker or you're going to market packaged up as this is what you can do with us type approach, you're already, for me as an inquirer or an investor, I'm already kind of less interested because I want to know why you're looking to sell. Why aren't you trying to extract that value out of the business? So in negotiation, I've always thought that the person who has the longest list usually comes out best. If you're going in with one item that you're negotiating on, you've not really got any areas to move around. But if you've got 20 or 30, which is very, very achievable in M&A and in the agency world, there's so many factors that could be important to you as a seller. I would get a really extensive list prepared and I would write down what's the non-negotiables, what are the things that I'm willing to move on. And you may be surprised, the things that you find important might actually not be that important to the buyer. It's not all about the cash on day one or the multiple. From my experience, there's usually lots of other factors that are important to you as a seller. So create that list, have a prioritization, create a competitive environment. And don't get distracted, right? The biggest trick in private equity is to distract the seller so that they, can drag out a process for 9 months and then come back and say, oh, well, the numbers you said you were going to hit, you didn't hit them. We're going to now reduce you on the price. That's all those classic tricks. Are reasons why we don't like the traditional PE model, because it generally is not a great experience for founders. It is in some cases, but when you dig under the skin of it, it's usually the PE firms that come out with the biggest win there. So have that list and don't get distracted. Focus on the metrics that are going to matter to the acquirer and keep doubling down on that. Because any sale will be a distraction, and most sales fall through. We're seeing a lot right now in the small agency space that founders are in a process for 9 months and then the funding collapses at the last minute. This is just day to day right now of what's happening in the market. So if you've then had to lose revenue and profit during the process, it's like a double kick when you're trying to actually conclude a sale.
And with the type of deals that you've seen with earnouts and the team and everything like that, what are some examples of deals that you've really enjoyed to do when it comes to like actually having the transaction go through, where people are either earn out, if it's all cash, if there's a big team, what happens to that team, if they're getting pieces of it. What have you seen that you've liked?
Yeah, I mean, we recently closed and announced a transaction with a PR agency and creative agency that we brought into the group, and what was really rewarding about that was actually seeing the team, the management team, feel really empowered and excited about the next stage of that agency. From day one, from speaking to the founders, we had a great rapport. We understood the history of the business. This was a agency that's been built for 20 years. This is a big decision for a founder at that level. And so seeing that kind of post-transaction ripple effect through the agency of like, wow, this is exciting. Look what we can do now. Look where we're going. Look at the peers we've got within the group. That for me was really rewarding. We acquired equity in a podcast production business earlier this year. Again, meeting the team who I hadn't met pre-transaction and being able to kind of hear their stories and see them be excited about this next stage. Because the agency world is all about the people, and I think there's always this worry with any kind of transaction or M&A that whoever the new people are who come in, they're going to do things that the staff don't necessarily want to accept. So sticking to what we say on day one and following it through has been really rewarding. And that brings momentum, and you start to attract. We talk about the top 1% is where we play, and there's a number of criteria that we look at that would align with that. But you start to create a really high bar, and I'm generally in this for the reasons that are truly genuine to what I want founders to see. I've had the ups and downs, I've seen the wins, I've seen the losses, and so we want to come out of this in 2-3 years time and see those founders be rewarded for what they've built and be on this journey with us. So yeah, it's the people for me, and seeing that ripple effect across the agency.
Nice. And that takes us to the finale. Knowing what you know now, what would you tell James 10 years ago?
Oh gosh. Stop looking for startups. I really wanted to be in the startup world. Spent over a decade in startups, and I don't regret it. But I wish I'd thought about things differently and thought, how do I compress time? How do I compress time instead of trying to join a company and spend 7 years or 5 years going from 0 to 10? How do I buy a company, invest a company, raise money to compress time? Because it is really tough starting from zero. And it doesn't get any easier, right? It's running a business is tough. Running sales is tough, which is where I've spent a lot of my career. And so I wish I'd taken a step back, started looking at the M&A space, thinking about what was possible, different ways to do things. And that would have probably brought our plans forward 10 years, and we would have been further ahead. So that's probably what I would tell myself. But I always say no regrets. I've had an amazing every company I've been involved with, I've really enjoyed. But it's yeah, try and compress time would be my advice.
Nice. Good tips. Good tips. So that takes us to, what are you working on now? And where can people learn more about it?
Yeah, so Inflective Group, we are backing the top 1% of independent agencies. We're looking for acquisitions and minority investments in the US, the UK, and the Middle East. You can find us at inflectivegroup.com, or I'm on LinkedIn, James Rose Inflective Group. Love to hear from founders who are in the agency space, maybe considering what the next stage looks like for them. We always come into conversations very open-minded, and I generally like helping founders to navigate some of this. So always open to those conversations. And if anything resonates with our model, then yeah, please do get in touch.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, wherever you guys are listening on iTunes or Spotify, links that James mentioned will be in the show notes. But thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much. Thanks, Steve.